Hello and welcome to Founders Amplified, where we spotlight underrepresented founders who are driving innovation and impact across various industries and sectors across the globe. I'm your host, Narayan Kulkarni, and I'm excited to be here with you today. Today's guest is Sarina Mohammadi. Sarina Mohammadi is an internationally recognized entrepreneur and youth advocate whose work touches diverse spaces, including data-driven advocacy, ecosystem building, global partnerships, and policy. Currently based in Canada, Sarina is the founder of YouthForge, the world's first research organization dedicated to eliminating the barriers that under 25 founders face globally through data-driven solutions. In 2025, YouthForge expanded into a team of 70-plus young analysts, researchers, and directors in 9 countries, partnered with schools and innovation hubs across Africa, Asia, Europe, and North America, collected first-of-its-kind global data on structural barriers faced by youth founders, and created a global support network for thousands of youth entrepreneurs. Sarina has been a TEDx speaker and has been featured on multiple entrepreneurship platforms, innovation shows, and podcasts. So, now that you know a little bit more about Sarina, let's dive in to the conversation. Welcome to Founders Amplified, Sarina. It is so great to have you with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me.
You are most welcome, and let's get started. So the first thing I'd love to know a little bit more about is your journey. So could you tell me and our audience what led you to become a founder, and if there are any moments or experiences that sparked that decision?
Absolutely. I would love to talk about that. So this journey actually started when I was in elementary school, and I was with my friend Hannah, and we had a school project that we were working on. And there was a very critical problem that was happening in my community at that time. And she came up with a really great idea that served the both sides of generating profit, but also addressing that very critical problem. And so we were very excited about that idea. And we were very young, and we came to our teachers and adults and people. When we kind of pitched that idea, it was very disappointing because the idea wasn't really evaluated on its own, but it was evaluated based on the other circumstances of biases of age. And it was kind of something that Hannah got dismissed on, my very close friend. And just a couple of years later, we found a group in United States who came up with a very identical idea, and they raised $1.2 million in seed investment funding. And that was the moment that was very very exciting for me, because I realized how much of impact young people can have and how much they're capable of achieving great things. And it was a turning point for me, and it sparked my burning passion for entrepreneurship. I wanted to be a founder to represent what it looks like to be coming from a different perspective of being young and having a fresh mind towards business. And it was a very important moment in my life, and that experience really shaped how I view entrepreneurship and why I want to be a founder.
Wow, well said. I'm first of all amazed to hear that in elementary school, that early, that it was something that you went ahead and found out. I also applaud and appreciate hearing that there was a notice of bias and age and things like that, but also then seeing externally inspiration that then you took forward in a way that was meaningful to you. And as you and I both know, those are directly translatable to the real world of entrepreneurship in many
Yeah,
different ways. Like you see that pattern, and also generally in fundraising or in other areas where
absolutely.
bias, not evaluating an idea in its merits, can be challenging. But also there are people who've made it, and also, but at the same time, like so sometimes
Absolutely.
a different approach or like self awareness, and then just going ahead and um, becoming one's authentic self, but also solving a problem and creating
Mhm.
impact in a profitable way is powerful. So amazing. But I'd love to know a little bit more about something. So as you've talked about, people dismissed you on age. You said you're in a specific part of the
Yep.
world when you were solving things. So can you tell me and our audience a bit more about maybe any aspects of your identity, your story that you feel were particularly salient in your journey and that give you now a really unique perspective as a founder in solving your particular problem?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. That's actually something I really want to talk about, and that applies for young founders in general. And me specifically, when I was 14, I had the privilege of running a business and implementing several different strategies that came from a youth led mindset and perspective. And being young and having that fresh perspective into the business world that's often very much full of maybe older people who are in the field of business. It really gave me a unique background and a really fresh mindset into looking at things differently, looking at the other side of the picture, and just grabbing opportunities that other people might not notice. And I think that's so common in young people because um, we all know that Gen Z are the most climate concise generation ever lived, and the upcoming generations are like that as well. So I was very much able to focus on those ethics that set apart business from other um, business owners. And I was actually involved in a tailoring shop, which I had the privilege of being at. And the way we were supposed to run a business was very traditional, just looking at the local community and barely going to local events. But the way that I was able to see it was highlighting how much of climate change we could have an impact on, drawing attention to if customers are choosing us as the company that they want to go for when they're having their tailoring or clothing alterations done. They get a lot of benefits of saving a lot of emissions. They get to know so much about our carbon saving program, which was really a turning point for our business of how we set ourselves apart and how we were able to operate differently to make ourselves differentiate from the many other competitors that were in the business field. So having that fresh mindset really helped me, but also our business in an incredible way that we did not imagine of. I mean, I was the youngest winner of the Georgina Chamber of Commerce as a new business. I was also the finalist of an international award by UK, and that fresh mindset really set me apart from the many other competitors. And having that I was very fortunate to have that. And I think every young person, every young individual who wants to pursue anything, whether it's in business, advocacy, anything that they want to do, their fresh perspective is it's so powerful and impactful, and they should know how valuable it is.
Beautifully said. I especially appreciate your emphasizing the need and the drive of people in Gen Z. And I would also extend this to Gen Alpha in, of course, the upcoming years
For
on
sure.
how Gen Alpha more broadly will be transforming the world. And to another point that you mentioned, which I think is absolutely amazing and valuable is yes, there are quote traditional ways of doing business or traditional and I use it in air quotes approaches in different fields. But yes, youth can bring energy, strength, ideas that can be real game changers, and also just sometimes being of very different perspectives is can be powerful. And I can tell as someone who's underrepresented myself, but also like talking to so many
Yeah.
different underrepresented people, there's oftentimes the perspective of, oh, I'm only the only person in the room. And that can be very, very uncomfortable. And that has been very, very uncomfortable. But it
Yeah.
also is a very powerful way, either ambiently through self reflection
Yeah.
or through direct action or a combination of both, a really
Agreed.
powerful way to differentiate oneself. And that actually is the pretext
Yeah.
for my next question. In your view, what makes Gen Z and by extension potentially Gen Alpha,
Yeah.
people who are entering into entrepreneurship,
Mhm.
really unique? What gives them a really unique angle into business entrepreneurship that I think that you think would be valuable for the world
Incredible.
as we evolve?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the first thing that comes into my mind, it's sustainability. We know how important it is to have climate concise perspectives into innovation. And there has been several different startups that have kicked off in just 2025, led by young people, and they have all had sustainability somewhere in their business. Um, they have had it as a core part of their business for the majority part. And I think that's so important for all businesses to have and to value human kind of not only the profit and the financial gains, but also the long term effects of the practices that they're doing within their business. And I think Gen Z and Gen Alpha are so aware of that because of how much we've heard about it and probably how much we've witnessed that at such a young age. Early on, we kind of seen the physical impacts of climate change, carbon emissions, and how much of an impact that has. And young people really implement that within their business strategies. And they look at the two sides of the table of both profit, but also sustainability. How do we make this a long term thing that we value the innovation on its own, but also the climate impacts?
Well said. I appreciate that you're talking about climate, but also you use the word sustainability, which is a polysemous word in the sense that yes, one most directly thinks about it in terms of like lowering greenhouse gas emissions, using resources in a more climate conscious way, but also there is the emphasis of organizational sustainability, removing the climate piece in the equation in business,
Right.
like thinking people think about it in that way. So I think that polysemous and more multifaceted way is important. But yes, and to your point as well, yes, I think Gen Z is growing up in a world where there's so much narrative around 1.5 degrees Celsius,
Right.
reducing emissions, like the cops, etc. And I appreciate that, like, yes, as you've talked about, and I also say this as well, because I do mentor, support a lot of founders who are like young, teens and up. Um,
Incredible.
and even before that, like who are they're bringing up business ideas. Climate is a really important topic, and especially for founders that identify as underrepresented, especially people who are identified as women or LGBTQ
Yeah.
plus, racial minorities, or immigrant or migrants. From those three communities specifically, I see this as an important issue. And also intersecting with other areas like health, for example, and with like even with finance. So I really appreciate that you're emphasizing climate as a core feature and
For
a
sure.
core aspect of how
Yeah.
people approach business. But that actually, again, leads me to my next question. So, and I love the word focusing on the youth piece because Youth Forge, you do a lot with Youth Forge, and
Yes.
that is, to my understanding, like a core feature, like a core focus of what you're doing. So, can you
Yeah.
tell me and our audience a bit more about Youth Forge and specifically what makes your approach innovative
Mhm.
relative to others who might be solving the problem in the same way?
Yeah, that's actually a very core problem we're trying to solve. So when I was at Keswick Tailoring, being running a business, I was very privileged to have access to a lot of resources, and I met with a lot of young people who didn't have that privilege. They didn't have as much of mentorship of resources, attending several different events because of the restrictions that were there. And when I wanted to join my local chamber of commerce to talk about these critical barriers, it was very difficult because there was an age restriction again that limited me from I'm sorry, joining that table and talking about these really critical barriers that young people face. And that was the moment that I thought there must be a table where young people sit and talk about these barriers. Because if we're not going to talk about these very important barriers, how are we going to solve them? And that was where Youth Forge was founded. And the really key problem that we're solving is that we're researching focused on under 18 founders. There's a lot of research organizations out there focusing on businesses and probably focused on different sectors. But the thing that really puts us apart is that we only focus on under 18, which is often dismissed by many startup research organizations. There's a reason why that we don't know much about the barriers that young people face, is that these startup organizations who are conducting the research are not really talking about, are not focusing about, or putting their lens upon, at least for a very short period of time. And at Youth Forge, we focus on the barriers of those young people, and we ask them questions through surveys, through video formatted interviews, to really understand the key barriers and advocate for those very limiting features and components that are holding them back from innovation and unlocking their maximum potential. And one of the other things that we do at our organization is we utilize these data through data-driven advocacy. And we reach out to, for example, universities for mentorship. We've had 1,000 students, 1,000 young people all across the world who to this date have filled out those surveys, and we've seen a majority having the mentorship difficulty and barrier, and we're using those data to drive that change and really show the world the magnitude of this problem, how much of interest is in this field, and how much of change we can create for these young people to be innovative and create a big change. So yeah, I would say that's a good summary of Youth Forge and what we do. And I'm so passionate about this organization. I've had the pleasure of meeting with so many incredible people who are also very interested and firsthand experience these barriers that young people face when it comes to entrepreneurship, because this is not just about driving economic competitiveness. It's also about inclusivity. It's also about valuing ideas based on the content of that idea rather than the potential biases. Um, so, yeah.
Well said. Thanks for sharing. I appreciate that. So I think it's very interesting and cool that you have as Youth Forge, a research organization focused on the interests of youth under 18 specifically, and also the way in which you're incorporating, I heard video format interviews, which, as we both know, TikTok and such forms
Yep.
of like social media are very popular among youth, but also as a way to drive like advocacy with that data, but also you're emphasizing an inclusion perspective. I will say,
Yep.
as you probably have encountered this perspective, but it's also again really important that you, as someone who has and is very proximal to that age group, is doing this, because as I'm sure you've heard this before, but a lot of times, and I know this because I mean I have a family who comes from medicine, and
Yep.
also I was on that path myself, and I have experience in health administration, and I have like connect with people all around the world. Like safeguarding age, that does become a really big problem and a big concern, which is one structural reason that can be a barrier for such research
Yep.
and consent, but also to a point as well. Like there can be biases around a lack of maturity or an over emotionality. I've heard sometimes as a
For
youth
sure.
myself who's wanted to do advocacy, where there might be a reason for that, but at the same time it can be very limiting, and it can be a bias that does close people off from having legitimate insights that are very powerful. But at the same time, if it's done thoughtfully, as like with organizations like Youth Forge, and if there is an intentionality around it and a passion around it, then yes, that can be very powerful and it can be extremely meaningful. But that I'm also curious about some things you mentioned, because I think
Yeah.
it's very interesting
Let me know.
that So it sounds like your surveys, but also how you're doing surveys,
Yeah,
uh, but also what you're advocating for. So can you talk a little bit more about those
for
three
sure.
things and what's unique about them
Yeah, for
or
sure.
innovative about them?
Absolutely. What we're advocating for is removing these age barriers, and I really connect with you on how you said about the maturity and the concerns for those aspects of these problems. And I think those are definitely true to some extent. I agree with that, and I think there are solutions that could. Um, Avoid having those problems, but also address some of these really key barriers. For example, I've heard this through several different conversations of allowing youth to be entrepreneurs is going to lead them to generational debt. And that could be true to some extent, but having mentorship available for those young people is certainly not going to do that, but it's going to give them the knowledge and the great kind of expertise to manage their finance or do things that avoid those potential trade-offs. Or for example, having them at the policy table speaking about their problems is going to make a really big difference on how our world or our business policy is shaped going on future. And those are the things that we are advocating for, things that ensures we're protecting our economy, we're protecting our young people, but also giving them the opportunity to leave, giving them the right resources to innovate, be entrepreneurs, or pursue their passions in whatever direction that they're heading towards. That's something that we're heavily focused on, and something that sets us apart in that field is driving data backed advocacy and having those real voices impact on what we're going to advocate for and provide for, which is not very commonly seen in many different organizations. It's definitely something that sets us apart.
Okay, that's interesting to know, and thanks for sharing. But to follow up, can you talk a bit more? Maybe are there questions you're asking that are unique or different
Yeah,
that are you don't see,
yeah,
or are there specific? Can you talk a little bit more about why it's important for a video format
yeah,
in research for youth
yeah,
versus paper surveys or standard like
for
ways
sure.
in which surveying is done?
Absolutely. I've had this conversation with one of my mentors, and he said something very interesting for me. When we were talking about how we want to make that change in the policy table, he said that it's very important for decision makers and change makers to have numbers. They highly value numbers, they highly value paper, but something that really is quite impactful for them. And it's the turning point for them. It's that they love stories too. They really love hearing that real voice speaking to them, looking them in their eyes, and really giving that emotional um, tick for them is very important. And that's why we do that video formatted to give them more of a story, of an emotional aspect to really check all the boxes and ensure that what we're doing is genuinely going to make an impact, and it's going to be effective, and it's going to make the change in the long run. And it's not just on the paper aspect or filling out the Google Forms, but also on the video aspect, and making sure that these efforts are going to have an impact.
Okay, thanks so much for sharing. So I think it's wonderful that you're doing surveys and research because, as you know, that informs broad decisions, which at multiple scales cascades into
For sure.
impact. And so
Hmm.
that's the pretext for our next question. So let's say that a youth forge is continuing as you envision it, and
Yeah.
you gain the momentum, you create the change, and you create the impact. And let's say we're like 5 years into the future. What are you seeing then that tells you that you've had this successful trajectory of impact, progress, etc.?
And for sure. The The number one thing that I would say we want to implement in the next 5 years, it's the mentorship provision. The ones that are available are publicly funded, especially in Canada. There are many different publicly funded mentorship programs available to everybody. In the next 5 years, we want to see them be available to young people as well, and be available to everyone, no matter their age. That's very big for me, because that is something that's going to indicate there's inclusivity in the business world, that we're valuing people based on their potential and their capabilities on its own, rather than the potential biases surrounding it. That's the biggest factor that we're pushing for, because these are available to everybody. Why not youth as well? So having that inclusivity involved within mentorship is very big for me. But also, we've seen the need and the demand for this critical, um, very critical thing that many people face barriers from. Many young people have indicated that mentorship is a big barrier for them, and having that addressed is going to be something that we would be very proud of. But also having their voices involved within policy tables, including Ontario Chamber of Commerce is an example, having their voices involved in different policy tables that shapes how our economy is going to run going on, is very important. And we keep pushing for those changes every day with our incredible team.
Well said. I especially appreciate that you're talking about um, seeing a policy level shift in terms of funding and representation. Because, I mean, you and I know this, but um, and I also know because I'm engaged in multiple different programs where, as a member of a mentorship network, or someone who specifically guides youth from a large nonprofits, that exists. But to your point, at a policy level, it is extremely rare for a number
Yeah.
of different reasons, some of which we've talked about later. But it does take a lot of momentum, thought, political will as well, of course. But ultimately, it's about the visibility and the traction from constituents in multiple different ways to make that happen. And I applaud that you have this visibility and this insight into making that happen. You've specifically mentioned Canada as one example, but like there are, of course, something that can really be
For
applied
sure.
to many different countries around the world is much needed, even especially in global majority countries where the average age is much lower, and particularly in continents like Africa or Asia, where yes, like the average age is younger and also the population growth rates are significantly higher. And also, some of
Mhm.
these issues like climate change are much more acutely faced by them. And
Mhm.
even in places like SIDS, where there is a long-standing tradition of community, where that is also very important. So I appreciate that you're talking about that. So I'm sure you've had quite the journey. You've built and gone through quite a bit, I'm sure, through building Youth Forge. Can you tell me one thing that you know now that you wish you had known before you started your journey? I'm sure there are many, but maybe one
Yeah,
stands out.
actually, yeah, I was just gonna say that there's many, but the one thing that I wish I knew was that being the only one in the table, if there are people who are over the age of 30 and I'm only 17, that's a privilege. And that is something that's going to set you apart. So I wish that I knew that I could take advantage of that further. I could make myself stand out from the crowd, taking advantage of that factor. Having inclusion is very, very important. And until we get to that point, it's very important to take advantage of being the only person in the room. Having that is very important for me, because I know that's common not only for age, but also when it comes to female rights, women rights, having inclusivity when it comes to entrepreneurship from people of color, people from the LGBTQ communities, or other groups that are often discriminated. Um, Please take advantage of being the only one in the room, because that is the key that's going to set you apart and lead you to being a unique person. And as you said, it's something that's going to bring you a niche perspective, a new perspective that's very different from everybody else.
Well said. I appreciate you talking about that because yes, like to people who have had that experience or they're just aware of, oh, I'm the only person in the room like this, such an insight from you can be very powerful. But even people who have that experience, like I know many, sometimes it can be very disillusioning to have to
For
be
sure.
in that situation for many, many
Absolutely.
years and have to hear many different voices. And yes, there can be a perspective for sometimes, oh, that young person, they like got that and that's so unfair. And like, why is that the case? That can definitely be, and I've heard that from people who are my age or older when that comes up. But at the same time, it's really important to understand that yes, hearing that can be very refreshing from someone at any age to give someone contribution in different ways. And we're in a collective community that is bringing change in a certain way. So if one person who is very conscious, wise, generative, caring in whatever identity they bring, if
Hmm.
their voice is amplified, then that is extraordinarily powerful for many different people.
Yeah,
And that, as
I
you
agree.
probably know, like Founders Amplified, as you know, has a very broad, very inclusive approach to how who it includes. And so yes, like we of course naturally include youth, but also like for this very purpose, that's one strong thing that I personally believe too. Yes,
Yeah,
if one makes their voice heard, whoever they are, there will be pushback in some ways, but also it's very powerful for others.
yeah, it pays the
But
way
of
for that.
course, they need the support that they
Require.
need supports to move that vision forward, and that is actually interesting because that's my next question. Sure, there are many things that like you have socials, etc., and ways that
Yeah.
people can support you. So, how can people find you and support your work?
We have our LinkedIn page and our social media. I mean, this organization is run by community and having people involved. We really are privileged to have the voices of every young founder involved with it, and having the community involved with it is such a privilege and it's such an honor. And having their support, whether it's through our virtual conferences, is actually one upcoming in January with a collaboration with the African continent, Ghana and Nigeria. Having those incredible people, bright minded people involved with our conferences in person or virtual is a pleasure, and having their voices involved with the direction that we're heading towards is a pleasure. So, having us on social media is the best way.
Fantastic. And to our audience, you can find the information that Sarina shared in the show notes. Now it's time for our signature question. Can you please fill in the blank? I amplify.
Young people.
Well said. Very succinct, but also very profound, given what we've been talking about and given what you and Youth Forge stand for. And I want to just say, with that, thanks so much, Sarina, for being here on this episode, sharing your journey with us, and also sharing your journey with Youth Forge. It was so cool to connect with you. I know we've like been in conversation through social media, but like not had a
Yeah,
in-person conversation like this, but also
absolutely.
is really cool to learn a little bit more about the impact that you are enabling in the world and are more indirectly, but also creating right now. And also, I want to take a step back and just reflect on some things that I appreciate about you and what you've shared. So there are many different things, but like a few things that stand out are the following. So first of all, I think when and as you also know, and I've mentioned this indirectly a few times, young people can feel very afraid to speak up, particularly young people of underrepresented backgrounds. I know because I've had this specific perspective myself. It can come from a place of empathy or it can come from a place of fear. I know
For
because
sure.
I've also known that too. But also when someone is very unafraid and articulate in sharing their perspectives, which
Yeah.
you are, that is very powerful and that's very wonderful. So I think the way in which you shared why it's important for young people to um, be
Be more.
impactful is wonderful. Can, as I've mentioned, I can think back to me when I was much younger. Also,
Yeah.
I think as you've talked about the aspect of research focused on under 18s, and also thinking about like video formats, things like that. I think that to me shows that you have an implicit understanding of systems at work, foundational aspects of change, and you're willing to work at that more structural level.
My pleasure.
And finally, I think it's also it shows a level of wisdom and foresight that you want to shift policy level conversations, which is valuable, but I think you've talked about it in a very actionable way, which I think is especially salient for someone who is like not only young, as you've talked about, but also has a lot of experience in firsthand creating a startup from a young age, and also has the momentum and has been actively building the momentum, even if it is in a country like Canada, or even if it is if you are someone who has multiple underrepresented identities. I think that shows a level of courage, that shows a level of wisdom, that shows a level of strength, which I think is much needed, and I think that is incredible that you have. So I want to celebrate you for those traits that you have, but also for more broadly being an inspiration for people who are youth who want to be founders and change the world, but also more broadly underrepresented individuals who want to change the world. So thank you so much, Sarina.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here. It was a pleasure talking to you about these very important topics, and I really appreciate your really great questions. Thank you for your time, and yeah, thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. I'm sure we'll have a number of conversations and stay in touch afterwards. But since it's the end of our episode, I'd like to say bye for now, Sarina.
Bye-bye.
To our listeners, thanks for tuning in to this episode of Founders Amplified. I hope you're feeling as inspired as I am. If you'd like to learn more about our guests and support them, check out the show notes for their details. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a rating, share it with someone you know, and follow us for more inspiring episodes like this one. If you're a founder who is driving innovation and impact in any industry or sector anywhere in the world and would like to be a guest, we'd love to hear from you. Check out the show notes for more information. And finally, remember that you, yes, you, have the power to amplify the voices around you. Whether you're a colleague, family member, friend, funder, mentor, or just another fellow human, your support matters. So I invite you to celebrate and uplift the underrepresented innovators in your life who are driving innovation and impact. Let's create a better future for everyone, together. Until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and keep amplifying.